All right, so I'm going to record this again and upload this for you guys so you can watch it again later. So what we're going to do is,
Where do you upload those to?
I upload them to YouTube. If you go onto our project page, you'll see here, I'm going to make this a little more visible, but there's 3 videos from last class up there, and they're just marked as video, so you can go back and watch. But I'm gonna change the styling on that so it's got sort of its own little knocked out section for each project. Yep. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to start, you know, getting a page up and running, dividing it, and actually start sort of laying things out and styling them to resemble what you're looking for from your mockups. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to go to File and New, and I'm just going to go with regular old HTML template. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to create a CSS document to go along with this. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And what these are a set of rules that apply different styles to change the way things look on our website. Everything from determining what a background color is, outlines, type, color of the type, what links look like, both in their normal state, when they're hovered over, when they're active, when they've been previously clicked on, all of these things. And these styles cascade down one from the other. So we may have, like with links, for example, it's got a couple different states to it. It's got that static state where it's just sitting there doing nothing. It has a style that is underneath that for when it's hovered over, and so on and so on. And there's a number of different ways we can modify this and change how this works in different circumstances. And the main way that we're going to be looking at in this class is how does the design look on a large screen like a desktop, and then creating an alternate style for smaller screens like our cell phones or a tablet. So that way we've got 2 different layouts that each serve a purpose for how the viewer is experiencing our website. On a larger screen, we can kind of work a little more with complex designs and things like that. For mobile devices where someone may be on a data connection, we may opt to pull out a lot of the images so that way it's loading the information they want much quicker. Also giving us the opportunity to optimize that website specifically for mobile devices. Things like making the type a little bit larger so it's easier to read, getting it to scale to the screen so that way it fits nicely in portrait and landscape mode, things like that. So I've got my new document, and I'm going to start with my responsive theme. So I'm just going to title this Responsive. The doc type is HTML5. And I'm going to attach a style sheet to this. And it's going to be added as a link. And I'm thinking that what this will let me do is just name it and then click OK. Link must please change. Okay, so we'll have to leave that for now. So I'm going to hit create and just make my page initially. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to save this. So file and save. And because this is going to be an index page for me, this is going to be a home page. Regardless of which folder it's in, we made an index for our hub page. Because this is going in a different folder, we're treating this as its own website. When we point to that folder with a link, we want the browser to look for an index page. So index, and this is project 1. And I'm just going to overwrite the demo that I did last time. So then I'm left with, you can see down here in the code, my basic layout. Yeah.
When you attach the external style sheet and it didn't go,
I just ignored it for now. I'm going to show you guys how to attach that right now.
so then just cancel it.
Yeah, just cancel it. And what you should end up with is just a page like this, and then I just saved it as an index into my project 1 folder. Now I'm going to attach a style sheet, and a style sheet is going to be a separate document. And the way we get the two to communicate with one another is we link to that style sheet in the header information, so where that invisible information goes, things like the title of your web page that you see in the tab, that's where this is going to go. We're going to make a link that just points to it. So I'm going to make my style document right now, and I'm going to go to File and New again. And this time I'm just going to choose CSS right below HTML for the document type. There's no other presets that need to happen with this. I'm just going to hit Create. It's going to make my document, and then I'm going to save this one as well. So File and Save, it's going in Project 1. I usually just name these documents Style. This makes it easy for if you're building a website for a company and later on down the road they decide to, hire an in-house designer or have someone else do web work. This will make it easy for them to identify which one is the main style sheet. And it's not uncommon for you to see maybe a second one of these or a third one even. So I'm just going to hit Save. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to link that style document to my main page. And this link will appear in every page for your website. If it's missing from one page, that means that page isn't going to see the styles it needs to display links the way you want, images, background colors, things like that. So this is a repeating line of code that we're going to include at the top of every single page we make. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that in. I'm going to go just below my title. I'm going to add a return. And let me see if I can figure this out in the new version of Dreamweaver. I'll look for my CSS window here. CSS Designer. Okay. Alright, so the window you're looking for is CSS Designer. If you don't see it, you can go under Window and make sure it's checked. Keyboard shortcut is Command F11. So in this window, when you click on it and make it active, my cursor has been placed in location where I'm going to insert this. Under Sources, there's a little plus icon. So I'm going to click on that, and because I've already made my CSS document, I'm just going to click on Attach Existing CSS File. It's going to pop a window open. I'm going to browse, locate that file and select it, and hit Open. And I want to make sure that it's adding it as a link. Conditional usage, that can all just stay as it is. I'm going to click OK. And I can drop this back up here. And what you're going to see is right here, it's now added a link to my style sheet. So I've successfully linked that up. And what you'll see is, I've got my two documents open here, but in my index page, what Dreamweaver does is it shows you related files that are linked to that document. So you'll see here, I can switch back and forth between both my source code, my index file, and style.css file. So I don't need that extra one open there if I don't want it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to start laying out what I want this web page to look like. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create what are called divisions. These are div tags. And what this will let me do is divide up the space on my web page and then say, okay, I want it to be this wide, I want it to be this tall, I want the background color to look like this, or I want the text within this div to look this way, things like that. So what I'll do is I'll create a div and then I'll give it a name. So I can give this an identifier of, you know, this div is named Bob, or this one is called, you know, body copy or content or image placeholder, things like that. And then what I'll do is I'll take that unique name that I've given it and create a class or an ID for it in my style sheet, which will then tell it what it's going to look like. So we set up, basically it's like framing out a house. We construct the frame in our main document, and then all of the stuff like the interior decorating, what color the walls are, the paints, the curtains, all that stuff, the furniture, that's located in our style sheet. So our source code is our main framework for our website and the main content. Everything else, what color the drapes are, all of that is in style.css. So we're relying on both of these to determine how our site is going to look in its design and in its layout. So what I'm going to do now is show you guys how I'm going to go about constructing a set of divs and then telling them how wide they need to be, what color the background needs to be, things like that. So the first step in this is we need to determine how wide our website is going to be as a whole. And I'm going to show you guys the responsive layout for this. This is probably the more complex of the two. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width of my website. Because this is responsive, we want it to squish and expand to a certain degree. So what I need to do is I need to tell it that it needs to fit 100% of the screen up to a certain point. I don't want this to expand off into infinity and end up with it, you know, going 4,000 pixels off to the right on the off chance that someone's browser does something weird. So I'm going to set it with a maximum width so that way it only gets so big. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to set that via a tag we normally see when we make a new document. So we've got our body tag right here, and if I click on it, it highlights the opening and closing. I'm going to give this a style. So to do that, I'm going to move over to my style.css file right here, and I'm going to click, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell this what element I want to style first. So I want to style my body tag, so I'm just going to type in body because that's what it's named. I'm going to give it one space, and then the keys to the right of your P key, that's got the two curly bracket keys, same keys you'd use to adjust brush size in Photoshop up and down. I'm going to put the opening curly bracket, so the one that's kind of squiggly. I'm going to give it a return, and then I'm going to put my opposite curly bracket to close it up. So this is the structure. In between these brackets is where you'll put what the background color is going to be, what the text is going to be, all of that stuff. So for my body, if I want to set my background color right now, I can tell it to do that. So within these, I'm going to make a space, and a lot of this is very intuitive. It's basically going to be named what you think it's going to be named. So if I want to set my background color, I'm going to type background is going to start to autocomplete for me. You can see here there's an option called background color. I'm going to double click on that, and hey look, it's giving me more options here as well. color with a little color palette. I'm going to double click that too. And this makes it pretty easy for you. I'm going to set it to, let's see here, maybe a nice little off-white color. I'll set it, adjust it. This slider on the side is opacity. I usually leave that alone unless I'm working with some sort of strange overlay type stuff. But basically I choose my color. Once it's set, I'm going to hit return, enter. And you're going to see it's going to add a 6 alphanumeric number. This is called a hex code. This determines the hue, the value, saturation, all of that. And you'll see this if you're in Photoshop choosing a color. That number shows up down in the bottom of a color palette. So this makes it easy for us to identify a color, drop in that number value, and replicate that color here. So I've set this number. I just need to close this tag up now to say, okay, I'm done setting the color. And that is just a semicolon. So this is our basic structure. We have our tag saying what the body is going to look like. We now have an element in here setting the background color. And it's background hyphen color, colon, pound sign or hashtag nowadays, I guess. Our hex code value of 6 individual characters. And then I'm done setting the color, so it gets a semicolon. And always make sure that you include that semicolon to close out that line. If that was missing and I start on a second style, it's going to cause some complications with it. So you can see here up in my preview, I have a background color now. It's set to this off-white that I told it that I wanted down here. Now what I need to do is set my width. I know that I want this to be 100%. I want this to be my one that stretches and expands or contracts as the screen changes. So following this same pattern, I'm going to say width, autocomplete it with a colon, and then I'm going to say 100% semicolon. So that's going to tell it to fill 100% of the browser screen. Now I want to tell it, I only want you to get so big. I want you to fit 100% of the screen up to a certain point. So I need to set a maximum width. So max, and you can see 2 options, max height, max width. And usually what I go with on a responsive layout is I'll set it somewhere between 1200 and 1000. So recently I've just been using 1000. And we want to set this to a pixel value because our screens are measured in pixels. So it can be a little confusing. We're using a percentage, but we're also using a pixel value. Percentages are going to be used for all of your widths on this. It's only with a height that you will set a pixel, an actual numerical value that isn't fluid like a percentage of the screen. So we've got our max width. Yes?
How do you get your screen to split?
To split like that, up here at the top you see code, split, and live.
Yeah, it's not letting me press the split button.
Okay. Let me come over quick and take a look. The style sheet won't have a split. Because there's nothing for it to split. It doesn't have any actual architecture. It doesn't have 2x4s. It's just
I sent you like a red, and it comes in
Yep. Yeah, it's two different boxes, and they color code it in a way that lets you know what you're doing, what you're working.
Mine doesn't show.
Oh, you was in touch.
Yes, it's attached.
I have no idea. That's good. Like, why does everything have to be so complicated? It's the only difference.
It's not.
That's one.
I have that. I set up the page on a separate computer. On my computer. On a separate computer.
That's why. Yes, that's
I can't see the.
yeah, she's having the same problem.
We got different. Does she have the double spaces? Does the style show twice?
Yeah.
Okay, click on the second one. Click on the second style. No,
But you go back. But she might not.
Oh, yes.
yeah, not have to look twice. That's
It's correct.
Wow.
okay. You're not trying to see the local text.
So just press get.
It could be that you just. Okay.
That's just like, that's when I'm thinking of the kids, but I don't know that's I thought it was
At least I'm not the
Melissa's having sort of the same problem.
So some pretty lucky. Yeah.
I'm having the same problem also.
Where it's showing two.
Yeah.
Alright. I'll come around and figure all that out. So let me just finish this. I'll show you guys divs, and then I'll come through and figure out what's going on and help you guys out. Okay, so we've established our background color, our width. We want this to be responsive, so 100%, and we've set a max width for this as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create dividers to determine the content for my website. So let's say I'm going to set up my 3-column layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make divs, and all they are is opening and closing codes, little lines that look like this. It's an opening arrow, div, closing arrow. And then the closing tag is the same thing, just with a / in front of it. So that's one. I'm making 3 of these. Before I make the others, I can sort of shortcut and, I'll make one. They're all going to be the same because they're all going to be 1/3 of the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up one and then copy it and just paste it twice. So I've got a div. I want this to be a 1/3, so I'm going to have to add a style to it, which means I need to make this unique in some way. Because I'm going to be making other divs for like the 1 2/3 layout, the half layout, the full layout, things like that. So I'm going to give this one an ID. So I'm going to just add under the first div in between the V and the closing arrow, I'm going to give it a space. I'm going to say ID. It's got an autocomplete. And then I'm just going to hit return, and it's going to be ID equals and then 2 quotes. And in between those quotes, I'm going to give it its name. I'm just going to call it 1/3, no spaces. Spaces can get you into trouble with your styling, so always leave out the spaces. So here I've got one of my divs. I'm going to just add content in between this, same as we did with our paragraph tags before. So I'm going to make a paragraph of just 1/3 and close it up. So you've got a div with an ID equals, in quotes, 1/3. I've got a paragraph in there with just some content, and you can see up here it's showing it. And then the closing div to close that div up. So I'm going to select these components, copy it, and paste it 2 more times. And then I'm just going to modify this to sort of reflect what I want to see up top. So you can see up here I've now got my 3 1/3 columns, but they're not lined up on my web page the way I want. And when I highlight them, it looks like that, you know, my web page isn't really centered either. So the next 2 steps for me are going to be telling each of these columns how wide they need to be, and also telling my web page to center itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some more styling now. Get rid of that. Okay. So I know that I've called these 1/3. So what I'm going to do is go to my style, and I'm going to make a new style for this. So I'm going to give it a return, move down. When you're dealing with something that's been assigned an ID, it's always that ID's name, but it's preceded by a £sign or a hashtag. So for this, it's going to be pound. You can see it's going to give me options that I've already set up in the linked document, 1/3. I can type it out or autocomplete. And then I'm just going to set my curly brackets in place. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell these to be as wide as I want them to be. And because we've given each one the same ID, they're all given the ID of 1/3, I only have to make this styling one time. So if I want to change all 3 of these, I only have to make those changes once, and they're all going to pick up this styling. So if you've got, you know, 100 links across your entire website and you want to change the color of all of them to blue, you set up that one class, and by changing it just once, you can affect all of those links across your entire site. So I'm going to tell this how wide I want it to be, because this is my 1/3 column. I'm going to tell this to be 33%. So width, 33%, and a semicolon to close it. If you want to be a little more exact with it, 33.3% will get you even closer. And then just for the sake of, you know, seeing these divs a little better in terms of their width, I'm going to add a background color to the div. So I'm just going to change the color that's filling it. And what you can see up here now is they're much shorter. They only fill about 1/3 of the total width of my page. And now what I need to do is I've got these set up. I've got my background color and all that sorted out. They're all assigned a width that I'm looking for. Now I just need to center up my web page and then tell my separate divs to float where they need to float. So that way they line up one next to the other. Yes?
What is a div? What does it stand for?
A div is a division or a divider. It's basically a way of taking your web page and dividing it into sections where it could be either, you know, a 100% wide section for the header and your navigational elements, or if you've got a 2-column layout, it would be 2 separate divs for, you know, maybe text on the right, text on the left, and images on the right, something like that. Yes?
It's 33.1.
33.3 will get you to what I like to call close enough. Yep. Okay, so now we're going to center up our web page. And this is where it might get a little tricky for you guys just because you're not familiar with some of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a margin on my web page. And this will only work if it knows how wide my body, the area of visible content, is. So we've already got width and a max width set on this. So what I'm going to do is tell this to have a margin left and right on my web page. So under body, I'm going to add a return, type in margin, and I'm going to say margin left, and I'm going to set it to auto, semicolon. And then I'm going to set the same for margin right. So auto, semicolon. And what you're going to see is, if I come over here, and when I go back to my source code and I just click within the body tag, the opening body tag, it highlights things for me. It puts this blue box around. This is the max width of my website, and you can see that it is now floating in the center of my web page content area. So now all I need to do is get my 1/3 columns to line up next to each other. So back to my style document. And what I'm going to do is, to get these one next to the other, I'm going to tell them to float in one direction. So when you tell something like a div to float left, it's going to want to go as far left and up as it can in its encompassing tag, in this case our body tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell all of these to go as far left and up as they can go. And because they're only 1/3 in width of that 100%, they're all going to stack one next to the other from left to right. So I'm going to, under 1/3, add float, left, and semicolon. And what you see now is they're all lined up one next to the other. Now, if I wanted to see, exactly what was going on here, just for the sake of showing you guys, I'm going to pull that out. And I think that might work for us. I don't know if you can see that. I did this just to show you guys that they are in fact 3 separate divs and not just one. I gave it a margin on the right hand side to put a bit of space between them. So if I was treating this as, I wanted a certain amount of space between my divs, what I would do is I would subtract a number from the overall width of each div. So if I wanted 1% of a margin between each of these, because I've got 3, I'm going to make my overall width something like 30 and just give it a margin right of 1.3. So it's going to add that missing 3% to each of these divs as invisible margin. But you guys don't have to worry about that for now if you don't want to. We'll talk about that more later on. So you can see here I've now got all 3 of these. If I test this out, you could pop this open in a web browser too, just by saving both documents, locate the index.html file and double click on it. It should pop it open in a browser. But you can see here that it's responding and changing the width based on how wide the screen is, based on how wide that 100% total width of the window is. So what you'll do is you'll apply the same thing, these same 2 components, a div with an ID and styles assigned to it, to the other ones. So just to show you once more, I'll do my 1/3 and 2/3 layout. So I know that the values for those are going to be, 33.3% and 66.6%. So I just need to make two different divs. In this case, let me just switch this back here. So 33.3. So what I'm going to do is I can reuse my 1/3 that I've already set up. So all I need to do is make one more different div and styling for it. So if I copy my div structure here and paste that in, and then what I can do is save myself time. I'll paste another one and call this one 2/3. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the ID. So I made a copy of my 1/3 div layout. I don't need to type that all out again. I just copied it and pasted it. And then I pasted it again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is now going to receive styling called 2/3. So I'm just going to change 1/3 under the ID to 2. And it's going to look a little funny up here for now until I set my 2/3 styling. So I'm going to save this. And then I'm just going to go to CSS. And again, I've got this set up just as it is. I'm going to make a copy because I'm going to use the same basic components. Add a couple returns, and then just change what it's called. So now I have an entirely different CSS style called 2/3 that's going to apply to that 2/3 div layout. And then I'm just going to change my values. 1/3 is already set up, so this one just needs to become 66.6%. And what I might do is change the background color so I can kind of see a little bit of a change in that. So I just backspace and go back. And I'll set a different color for that. And then when I close it with a semicolon, what you see is I've now got that 1/3 and 2/3 layout. So rather than go through the process of typing out a whole new one and dropping that in, I copied, pasted, and then modified to make each one unique. Because I set 1/3 up before, I can use 1/3 again. And then it's just a matter of setting up that 2/3 layout. Things like your half layout, it's going to be one style for both 50/50. Your 100% layout, it's going to be one style for your 100% layout. Things like that. Okay, anyone have any questions? Any concerns?
I typed all that stuff in, but it didn't change.
Didn't change? Okay, I'll come around and check that out for you guys. And some of you are having trouble with Dreamweaver. All right, any other questions? Okay, so that's the basic process. We're setting up our dividers, our divs, our 1/3, our 2/3, our set of 3 1/3s. Each one has an ID. Each one has content inside of that div. And then we're just telling it what we want it to look like. So our 1/3 layout receives styling of just one single 1/3 styling. 2/3 just gets its own. And we could apply these to multiples. Say we wanted another row of 1/3 layouts, we could do that. If we wanted them to be a different color, we could just make a new 1/3 layout, call it 1/3 layout 2, and then change our background color and assign that ID to those divs. So it offers us a lot of flexibility in terms with how we're dealing with what things look like, how they're set up, and this is how our basic process for designing our website. 2 components: our structure, which is our HTML document, and then all of our decorative elements, which are applied to that structure through our CSS.